Has BYU basketball finally turned the corner? We're talking about that. Plus, ESPN and the Final AP rankings are out. Is BYU too high, too low, or just right? And the BYU quarterback situation for 2025. Do the Cougars have who they need? And if not, who do they need to bring in? We're talking about that coming up on the Loyal Cougars podcast. Hello and welcome to the remote Active Podcast Studio, aka my house. This is the Loyal Cougars podcast, and I'm your host, Jake Edmonds. Today we have a special guest as our co-host, Jeff Hansen, joining us. The co-founder of Give 'em Hell Brigham podcast and
I think
website.
That's technically correct. I don't like to give Garrett any more credit than I have to, so we drop the co most of the time, and I just go with founder. And then when Garrett listens, like months from now, then he can complain about it then.
Yeah, and let's be honest, and don't tell Garrett I said this, but you kind of carry that show. So
yeah, no, we know. He could be the back end. He's the brains behind it all. But look, I'm the mascot and the face of it, so yeah. I get the credit.
So, Jeff, you also do you're an expert insider on 247sports.com. I don't know if that's your official title, but you do a great job over there with recruiting. First of all, how tough of a job is that?
It's a lot, man. I mean, because recruiting, it changes so fast. I try to tell this, and you might get me on a soapbox. So I try to tell this to people that recruiting insiders, like generally, you don't know anything, right? Because you only ever get one side of every story. You never hear two sides. And the way that recruiting and the NCAA and all this stuff, like you can't get the second side of the story. So I can have a recruit tell me, hey, I'm coming to BYU. And it's like, hey, cool, let's run with it. That guy's going to BYU. BYU can't confirm. They never will confirm. That kid might just be making something up entirely. That's happened a lot. So it's weird. It's weird to do as a hobby, but it's a ton of fun. I've had, I get to talk to people I have no business talking with. So it's been a lot of fun.
Have you gotten to a point where, and I'm not trying to make this a one-on-one interview because we do have a podcast to get to, but I find it's difficult to get in contact with these kids. Do you just reach out to them on social media, or have you gotten to a point where they know who you are and they're reaching out to you?
I think it depends on the profile of the recruit.
Yeah.
A 5-star, if BYU, like Ryder Lyons, like I've talked with Ryder, but I get a response 1 out of every 10 texts from Ryder. And if you're ever listening, like Ryder, come on, guy, text me back more often. But like other guys that, especially local with the stuff that I do over at KSL, like there's a pre-relationship there a lot of the time. So it's kind of hit and miss.
All right. Well, Jeff, first of all, thanks for joining the show. I know you have a busy schedule. You live up in, is it Davis County, Bountiful area?
Davis County. Yeah, it's not that far north for all of you Provo people.
But far enough not to come down for a podcast, and I totally understand that. So we're happy to have you on. Very grateful. I wanted to first talk about this last week, and especially over the weekend, BYU basketball beating Cincinnati. We could talk about the Colorado game as well, but really the Cincinnati game was to me the turning point. And if BYU is going to make a tournament run, if they're even going to get on the bubble, this is the game that I think we'll look back on and say this is the turning point. What's your takeaway from the Cincinnati game specifically?
Yeah, I think that these two games, look, I'm not the basketball guy that can sit and break down all of the X's and O's and tell you what went right in that game, but I can tell you what I've seen just from looking at teams, right? Looking at teams in any team sport, watching a lot of BYU basketball over the years. The thing that's been missing from this BYU team, they haven't enjoyed playing basketball. Like everything has been a grind. Getting into their sets, defensively, rebounding, you could see frustration set in really, really quickly. You didn't see that against Cincinnati, and I think that started against Colorado, especially in the second half, that there was some real confidence that was established, and guys looked like, hey, we can play basketball, and basketball's fun. And then against Cincinnati, it was fun the entire time. Guys were loose. They played really well. I think that is honestly the biggest thing is there's been so much new and so many expectations and coaching staffs having to adjust to different levels of basketball. I think somewhere along the line they forgot to breathe, right? And just go out and play because they're super talented. That's what that Cincinnati game was to me.
And honestly, it feels like this BYU team rides momentum more than any BYU team that I can remember, at least in recent memory. to where, literally they struggle on the road so much because they have a hard time gaining that momentum. They don't have the crowd behind them. Whereas at home they do. And at home they shoot so much better. They score a lot more. They defend a lot better. And it's fascinating to watch just how well they play when they have momentum, and not just like in a game, in an individual game, but they beat Colorado, they ride that momentum into Cincinnati, and now they're feeling, I feel like pretty confident, at least as a fan. And like you said, during the game, they look more confident than ever, and they're going to need it because they now approach a schedule that's going to be one of the toughest in the conference, and we'll talk about that a little bit with who they play this week, but. Just going off of what some people said on Cougar Board after the Cincinnati game, Maween on Cougar Board, I think I pronounced that right, said, unspoken X factor from last night, and this is talking about the Cincinnati game, the 10 to 12-foot teardrop floater was consistently converted. This shot has been there all season but has not been consistently taken and or made. Last night, Richie Dawson and even Trevin all consistently shot it, and it opened up the perimeter. And I actually noticed this before I even read this comment. It seemed like they were penetrating, and they've been able to penetrate somewhat all season, but it felt like they always canceled, or they always aborted the play, and especially Yegor, and Yegor is kind of the one that initiates the offense anyway, but it seems like, and I've talked about this in past podcasts, but it seems like there's always a screen set for Yegor, and he takes like 2 or 3 dribbles and just stops. Like he terminates his dribble. And I loved that it wasn't just Yegor doing this, by the way, but they would go get around the screen, they would start driving, and what defenses do is they sink. They pull their defender, their big man, back, and they just defend the rim. They basically puppy guard the rim. And so what they're doing now, and what they did during the Cincinnati game, was that they just floated it over the top, and I think that's been there all season. And I really think that's something that they emphasized in practice this week, because it was a noticeable difference in the offense.
Well, it was. And to me, I hear that, and it kind of reinforces what we said, like confidence, right? That, like, if you, I don't know, let's take something that everybody can relate to. We can't all relate to being college basketball players, but like if you're in sales, right? If you get told no 100 times and then you get a weird deal that comes through, that you got to get approval, it's kind of funny, it doesn't fit the traditional box, you're probably not going to be real apt to be like, hey, let's go to talk to all of my bosses and get this weird deal approved, because it's not what you do, and you've been told no, you haven't had any success, right? But if you're riding a heater, Jake, if you have 3 or 4 deals that close in like a month, and then you turn around and you're like, hey, I got this weird one, but I'm on fire. I'm just going to roll with it and see what happens. You're a lot more confident taking that something that is maybe there, it's been there all along, but going and trying to make something happen that maybe isn't the design, right? Because I don't think that the play design is to go and shoot a 12-foot floater. That's not how basketball in the analytics world is. Yeah. But if it's there, go take it. And I think that's what you're seeing from this basketball team in these last couple of games, is that guys really, they're just trusting instincts now. They feel like, hey, I can play basketball. I am as good as what the hype, blah, 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 right? So you can adjust, you can pivot. You're not so rigid. I played high school basketball, and our coach at the time, and I don't want to like totally condemn this guy, but like Coach Holtz at Clearfield High, we're looking right at you. His whole like desire was like the one shot from the play. And if other shots were open, like guys were always really reluctant to take that shot, even if it was open, because the play was designed to do something else. And I think that you could sense semblances of that from this BYU team, that everybody was afraid to maybe make a mistake, or that they would miss a bad shot, that they just weren't trusting their instincts. And that 12-foot floater, I think, is symbolic of trusting your instincts and taking the play that's there to be taken. And credit to the coaches for letting guys get hot. Awesome for the Marriott Center and whoever, whatever basketball gods blessed the team with 60% from the 3-point line to give them that confidence. Awesome. But I think it's just a confident, free-flowing team, and that wasn't there up until the last couple of games.
Yeah, and you could say, it's a Cincinnati team that had lost like 5 of 7. I think now they've lost 6 of 8 and kind of were down. But the Cincinnati defense was one of the best defenses BYU is going to face in conference. I think coming into the game, as far as points allowed, they were second to Houston. in the conference. And
wow.
Houston, we obviously know how good their defense is. So, you can say, well, this Cincinnati team's not that great. Their defense is. Their defense is a team that holds teams to fewer than 65 points a game, and BYU scored 80 on them. Granted, it should have been 77. We're not going to talk about that last shot because who cares? But the reality is BYU, and I think that floater, the success of that floater early on opened up the offense for the rest of the game because, again, in the second half, as we all know, BYU went 11 of 15, and I love what you tweeted after the game, by the way, about BYU shooting the three. Do you remember what you said?
It's something of like, why didn't they try that all along? Seems like that was the solution.
Seems like that's a great strategy. Just shoot better from three. That's the strategy. But that's what allowed. I think the fact that BYU had success forced the exterior defenders to then sink back a little bit and try and defend that pick and roll or that screen play to where the shooters on the outside were then open. And then obviously the shooters had to make those shots. I think Cannon had a great breakout game. Shooting at least. He was 3 for 4 from three. And then obviously Yegor Demon. And those are two guys that have struggled from three all season. And for Yegor to also go 3 of 5 from three. It's now granted, we're not going to get this offense all season. I think there's probably not going to be another game where they shoot 73% from three in a half, or even 62% for a game. But if they can even shoot 47% from three in a game, they're in a great position to win a lot of games this season, starting with Baylor this week, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you're right. I don't think that those statistics are going to hold true. But if Yegor can shoot better than the 25% that he was coming into that game, right? That's what this game does. Is it maybe 60% is completely unattainable, but if you can get the confidence to get to 35%, that's perfectly attainable, and that changes the way that BYU offense runs. I think the last couple of weeks, especially, some of those threes that Cannon was shooting and making against Cincinnati, he wasn't shooting at all. He was dribbling out, he was passing. If you can get him in his rhythm, find a role for him on this team, he's the best perimeter defender, maybe short of Richie Saunders, that this team has. BYU needs Cannon Catchings to be really good down the stretch in Big 12 play, but he's got to be able to be playable on offense, right? And so that kind of confidence for him, that's a big deal. I'm with you. I think this game probably never happens again, but the feelings, the reverberations from that game are going to be felt for weeks to come.
It's a confidence thing, right? And it all kind of circles back to what we first said, which is this team rides confidence. They ride momentum. They build that confidence. And Yegor and Cannon, because they're freshmen, right? They're not these kind of experienced seniors who know how to get through adversity. They're still learning how to do that. And I think Yegor specifically with 7 assists, 4 steals against Colorado, that built into then what he had against Cincinnati, which was 15 points, the 7 assists and 3 of 5 from 3. That type of stuff needs to happen. I think it's only going to happen more throughout the rest of the year. Now, is it going to be enough for BYU to win the games that they need to make the tournament? I don't know. But it's definitely to me, again, this is a turning point in the season if they are able to make that run.
Yeah, I agree. I want more Yegor Demon stank face, man. I mean, you got to see it for the first time all year, that disgusted, I'm him. We haven't seen that from a guy that is him, that has I told somebody that even in the midst of Yegor's struggles, I think that maybe short of Danny Ainge, and I'm old, but I'm not that old. I didn't really get to see Danny play. I think that Yegor is the most naturally talented basketball player that's ever come through the program. I don't think that's a hot take. That doesn't mean he's been the best basketball player. He's been really bad. But even in the midst of his downstretch during that last month, he still had all that talent. Now if you can mix in that stank face every once in a while and Yegor can live up to that talent, my gosh, he's the key to this whole team. I mean, so much runs through him. His usage rate is through the roof. Evan Miyakawa has a stat that's just a producer stat, and he ranks everybody 1 to 5. And if you're a 1, it's not like a performance grade. If you're a 1, then that means you're a producer all of the time. If you're a 5, you're a receiver all of the time. So Keba Keita, he's a 4.8 on that scale. He's not producing anything. He's receiving everything, right? Yegor's a 1.7. I mean, that guy needs to be there to make things happen for BYU because that's what he was brought in to do, to produce and run that offense. I loved the stank face because he was having fun again. My belief, Jake, and there's no way to prove this. Ever since he shaved his head, that's kind of when things went downhill. I could see the fade coming back a little bit in the last week. It's faint, but it's there, and I think that says something. I think that's important to monitor in the coming weeks.
All right, we'll have like a Yegor hair check.
Yeah,
and if he shaves it again, we gotta record it and see how well he does.
Yeah.
By the way, that pass that he had against Colorado, and just speaking of his court vision, everyone knows what I'm talking about, right? The between the legs, in transition, Richie's behind him. I don't know how he even saw Richie because I don't think he turned his head. But for him to not only see him but to deliver a dime between his legs to Richie in stride to shoot that three,
incredible.
By the way, if Richie misses that three, like how much crap is he getting?
Yeah, way less cool.
But anyway, so yes, I think Yegor, and the success of this team is going to hinge on Yegor, and I think his confidence. That stank face is a perfect example. His confidence is growing, which is a great sign, and it's important coming up on this week now because BYU plays Baylor, a team that I actually think matches up interestingly well against BYU. In the sense that they're both like kind of middle of the Big 12 right now. I think they as far as win-loss record, as far as like point differential and all that stuff, they're pretty similar. Now BYU's at home, and so I think BYU kind of has the edge. But Baylor's got the fourth best defense in conference. They're 12th in the Big 12 in allowing 3-pointers at 34%. By the way, BYU's best in the Big 12 in shooting the three. And then they don't turn it over. And so I think it's going to be a great test at home. And again, if BYU can ride the momentum into this Baylor game, I think they've got a pretty good shot.
Well, it's two teams that are kind of similar, right? That Baylor also had high expectations coming into the season. BYU had high expectations. And both teams stumbled, right? I think BYU stumbled more. Like that, they stubbed their toe a lot harder than Baylor did. But Baylor lost to Arizona. They lost to TCU. They don't lose 2 games in a row very often, especially in the Big 12. And so they needed to get right, and they got to play Kansas State and Utah back to back. That helps. Like that's going to help anybody get right? And so they're feeling a little bit more confident today than they were a week ago. You've got Colorado and Cincinnati games in BYU's back pocket. I think both teams are feeling more confident. This game is more competitive than it looked like it would be, even, like I say, even just 1 week ago. So which team comes out hot first? Like which team finds that groove right away? I agree with you. I think this game being at home really helps BYU. The crowd can get there. They can ride that momentum. That's tough. I mean, this is a tough place for Baylor to play. The Marriott Center is always crazy. I do think these teams match up really well. So I like BYU's chances going in. But, man, it goes so fast, right? Because the first 5 minutes of the game, if they start out 0 of 6 from 3, which is perfectly reasonable to have happen, this team, just the youth, I think it's the youth of this team, that could be, like, totally deflating. They've got to start hot.
Yeah. And being at home helps. So then they go on the road, and they play a UCF team that is a high-paced, volume shooting team. So if you like shootouts, you're going to love this game. Now, UCF's at home, and so they may shoot a little bit better. But they lead the league in the conference in 3-point attempts. And they shoot it about as well as BYU. BYU actually shoots it better from 3. So you're going to have a lot of shots from 3 in this game.
Yeah.
Now, they do try and force you off the line, and so they're going to give up a lot of 2-pointers to BYU. Can BYU take advantage with those floaters that they've practiced or had success with against Cincinnati? I think you're going to see a lot of that. I think you're going to see a lot of feeds to Foose and Takeda, or at least lobs to Takeda. But UCF, I actually think of the 2 games this week, UCF to me was probably the most challenging, only because they're on the road, and I don't think BYU. Obviously, this year they haven't done well on the road, and then add the fact that you fly to Florida, you're flying to the Eastern time zone. I think that's going to be a huge challenge. But again, it's this is the time of schedule. This is the part of the schedule where BYU can really make up some ground.
They can, and I'm with you. That UCF's tough, man. They've got great athletes. It's a lot like playing UCF football. Like, I don't know that they're the most talented basketball team, but you know that they're athletic, they're long, they're fast. Their style of play is very physical. I don't know. I mean, if people don't remember those games against UCF last year, Like there's going to be 1,000 fouls in this game. I mean, this is going to be a very physical game, even as a perimeter-oriented game. So that means you're going to see people picking up the ball at half court. And that's not been something that Yegor's done well. That's not been something that Dallin Hall has traditionally done well. When that physical defense meets them up and they've got to contend with that, not like a loose full court press, but like true, meet them at half court and get bodies on guys. And that's what UCF likes to do. That's tough. I mean, that's a tough matchup for BYU.
Yep. All right. So obviously an important week for BYU basketball. BYU football this last week had some the Final AP poll came out. ESPN also came out with the early preseason rankings. We're going to talk about where BYU is ranked. I think it's actually kind of interesting because there's a pretty big differential between Final AP poll and early preseason poll. So does ESPN think BYU is going to be better next year than they finished this year? We'll talk about all that coming up on the Loyal Cougars podcast. This episode is brought to you by Aptiv. Aptiv believes that every home should be enjoyed. They tailor their pest control treatment plans to target pests when and where they're most active. Plus, if you see pest activity between treatments, Aptiv will return to take care of the problem at no additional cost. It's their way of making sure every customer is satisfied and every pest is controlled. If pests stay away, Aptiv is why. Visit goaptiv.com/loyalcougars or call 844-966-4787 and mention this promotion to get your initial treatment for just $29. That's goaptiv.com/loyalcougars or call 844-966-4787. Get home field advantage with Aptiv. Why should you have to choose between style and repping your team? Wooden Grail is bridging the gap between modern fashion and college fandom. Their hats and apparel are made with premium materials like suede and corduroy, featuring bold, unique designs that let you show off your team pride without sacrificing your look. Whether you're at the game or on the town, Wooden Grail lets you do both. Check them out at woodengrail.com and step up your fan game. Use code CougarBoard for free shipping on any order. All right, switching gears now and talking about football. The Final AP poll came out this last week, as well as ESPN's early preseason poll. Now, we talked about Athlon's early preseason poll last week. It was Hama Mooley and myself. And I don't remember where BYU came in. I think they came in around 15. Mm-hmm. And I think we were both okay with it. But the Final AP poll came out this week, and BYU finished the season 13. I want your impression of that first, and then we'll talk about kind of what the fans are saying.
I think the biggest thing that I drew from that right away is that the playoff is going to influence the final poll. And that's obvious, but the playoff is going to influence the final poll no matter what, right? I mean, if you're not in those top 12, it's going to be pretty rare. I think Ole Miss was 10 or 11 if I remember right, but I think they were the only non-playoff team to crack the top 12. And that's because Clemson won, right? And Clemson got an auto bid that maybe they, shouldn't have had based off of record alone. So 13 in my head, and we have 1 year's worth of data points, but 13 in my head is, I think that's probably the ceiling for a non-playoff team. We can argue whether or not that should be the ceiling, but I think that's what reality is going to be going forward. So I don't have any problems with 13. I would have maybe argued closer to 11 based off of body of work, but I don't have any real problems with 13.
Yeah, and I don't think – we talked about this. Hem and I talked about this last week. These kind of – and granted, this is based on last season's worth of work, so 2024's season's worth of work, where we talked last week about the Athlon preseason poll, which is trying to project kind of BYU's – or the NCAA's preseason rankings.
Yeah.
And so I guess different factors go into those. But I agree. I think the only issue I have with the entire ranking, at least up until 13, is SMU being ranked 12, one ahead of BYU. And it's just, it's one. So I guess it's not that big of a deal. But the fact that SMU went 11-3 and lost to BYU only had 2 losses. It tells me, like you said, that they value playoff appearance more than they value overall record and head-to-head.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's, if you look at the voters, like the spread of how many AP vote, 50, 60 voters, whatever there are. If you look at the spread, it was pretty clear that there were some the guys who routinely had, there was a lot that had SMU ahead of BYU. You look at those voters' ballots, like the individual ballots, it was almost exclusively playoff teams, like even Clemson, right? Playoff teams got boosted up. And then the guys who had SMU lower, or the guys that maybe had Ole Miss high enough, right, to crawl up to 11, they were the ones that looked at, irrespective of what happened in the playoff or who made it to the playoff, they looked at 13, 14 games. So it really is going to, what is the maturity of an AP voter? I don't think very mature. I think they just fill out their bracket that they filled out a week ago and then, push that forward a lot of the time. Until you get some of those old heads out, right? I think that's just kind of what's going to happen is, the playoff teams must be the 12 best. And that's, I'm with you. I would have had SMU below BYU, but you can definitely see the logic that a lot of voters had.
So here's an interesting perspective. And it's, first of all, I think people that are critical of the final AP poll, you can be critical of it. I just don't think it really matters, right? It doesn't really matter in terms of, now, you could say it factors into, preseason rankings next year, and maybe it does, but I don't think it's really worth getting up in arms over, but I do think this is kind of interesting. So Cougar Stats on Cougar Board, on X or Twitter, Indy Coug on Cougar Board, same person, said, since 1989, when the AP poll went to 25 teams, 189 P4 teams have finished the season with 2 losses. Of those 189, just 16 of them were ranked 13 or lower in the final AP poll. And BYU is one of those teams. The last team, by the way, to have been ranked 13 or lower, Baylor in 2013. So you've gone more than 10 years since this has happened, and so BYU is kind of like this historic, on a negative side, this historic result in the final AP poll, which I thought was kind of fascinating.
That is interesting. I guess you got to look at, like, when you take the history of that, like more games. I don't know. I don't know what that means. I have a hard time saying that means anything. It doesn't mean nothing, but I don't know what it means.
Yeah, and again, like you mentioned, this is the first year with a 12-team playoff, and I think that factors in. I think playoff appearance is something that they haven't had since before 2024, and that factors in. I think you're going to see it'll happen a lot more, actually, especially with Big 12 teams where they don't play. I actually don't think the Big 12 playoff or the Big 12, I guess, regular season system it needs to be more robust. They need to play each other more, I think, and have a better way of determining a conference champion, and or at least teams that appear in the conference championship. Because I don't believe that the Big 12 sent the best team to the playoffs. Now that can be a different podcast altogether.
It could be. I have so many ideas, Jake.
Yeah,
you want my real idea?
I 100% want your real idea.
I have a real idea, and I probably stole it from somebody. I don't know who I stole it from. But I wish every conference, and maybe the Big 12 could lead the way. But I think there's revenue generation here. I think there's lots of reasons to do this from the business of college football side. I want the top 4 ranked teams to play a semifinal game, to adopt the basketball model. That if you're in the top 4 at the end of the regular season, you're now in the Big 12 conference tournament, and you play 1 versus 4, 2 versus 3, and then that's who determines the Big 12 championship. And you have your own miniature tournament spread out over, 10 days or whatever you want to do. You can license the life out of that, sell it to TV networks. I think it makes so much sense from the financial side of things. And then that's how you determine what the Big 12 championship is. It works for every other sport. Why couldn't we do that for football?
Well, you have a finite amount of weeks. I mean, you have to get it done. It would have to be done before the tournament, the college football playoff tournament starts, right? But Army, Navy, they have their week, right? Don't they have their own week where they're the only 2 teams in the playoff? They got their own week. Yep. Yeah. So you could extend it, I feel like, but then you run into the issue of, are your teams fatigued by the time they get to the college football playoffs? That's
something to consider. Honestly, though, I think once the dollars came in, all of the other conferences would follow suit.
They wouldn't care, yeah.
Yeah, they would all be like, "Oh yeah, great idea. There's how many more millions? We're in. We'll do it too." But
I could see that. But I love the idea. That's a good idea.
So much sense to me.
Yeah, totally.
It'd be fun.
All right, so looking now ahead, ESPN did their early preseason rankings. By the way, these early preseason rankings, I think, are I've made my opinion known about these. They are worth talking about for fun. They're not worth putting any stock into. But that said, Mark Schlabach, who put this preseason ranking out, he said about BYU, there are a couple of starters who will have to be replaced on the offensive line, but reinforcements from the transfer portal should help, and we'll talk about some of those. On defense, 4 of the 5 top tacklers should return, although BYU will have to reload up front. Kalani Sitake has built a solid program that should contend within the Big 12 each season. I think it's fascinating. The Cougars won't play Arizona State or Kansas State during the regular season, and road games at Iowa State and Colorado might be tricky. We talked about this last week. BYU's season schedule next season is actually pretty favorable, and he mentioned the 2 probably toughest road games for BYU, which is at Colorado and at Iowa State. But you play Utah at home. I don't think Utah, by the way, is going to be down again like they were this last year, but they might be. I've actually heard some interesting theories about why Utah was down. And why they could be down again for the foreseeable future. But we'll save that for a future podcast. But I think he kind of hit it spot on. BYU, he puts BYU at number 9, by the way, preseason. And it feels high.
That's high.
But he does make good points as to why BYU should be the same, if not potentially better, next year.
Yeah, I think 9 is high. I think I went and looked, and to kind of like reemphasize your point of how these are just for fun. Within the first hour of like after Ohio State wins the national championship, after clocks hit 0, I counted 16 national media outlets that rushed out their way too early rankings within 60 minutes of the end of the game. This is clearly clickbait fodder, but 9 feels high. Even for clickbait fodder, 9 feels pretty high to me. I think that Circa Sports came out with their odds for like the national championship odds for next year. You break that out into Big 12. I think the BYU's had the 6th best odds in the Big 12. Baylor, I think Utah, Iowa State, I can't remember, Kansas State. There were 4 or 5 other schools that had better odds than BYU to win the national championship, which tells me that, at least the money side of things doesn't buy BYU being what they were this year. I don't know. I think that's crazy. I think that's too low for BYU. But, somewhere in the middle, I do think that I like the call out that Schlabach made in saying, hey, look, there's holes on the offensive line. I don't know how those holes get replaced like right away. I know that there's, how do I say this? There are solutions. Andrew Gentry absolutely is part of the solution, right? Caleb Etienne declares for the draft. So now you've got to find 2 tackles. Yeah. Andrew Gentry's coming off a Liz Frank injury. Like, that's not small. I don't know where Andrew Gentry is at physically. He's not going to be able to play most of spring ball, or at least certainly not be physically cleared for 100%. So that's a variable that, like, Andrew Gentry 100% healthy, absolutely pencil him in and feel great about it. I don't know. The health is a big question mark. Yeah. I know we've got Isaiah Jada kind of penciled in on the other side. I'm not sure he wins that job. I think Austin Leosa is probably the guy who beats out Isaiah Jada next year. So I think there's a lot of variability, a lot of pieces that are very unsure at the tackle spots.
Yeah, and you mentioned Etienne. His situation is very interesting to me, and I think it kind of ties in with what we're going to talk about next, which is this JUCO waiver that that the NCAA is still getting a ruling on from the courts. Which, for those who aren't familiar, I actually did a little bit of research over the weekend, but Pavia, the quarterback from Vanderbilt, transferred from a junior college, and he is suing the NCAA to be able to get more eligibility because he transferred from a junior college. He's claiming that time at a junior college should not count against his eligibility in the NCAA. So in the meantime, while this is kind of sorting itself out in the courts, the NCAA is giving a waiver to athletes who are playing next season. So the 25-26 season, not just football, the 25-26 season, or maybe it is just football. I don't know. And that affects a few guys on the team. I know specifically it was going to affect Etienne, Lassiter. I think Bamba was also supposed to be affected by this. Those are just kind of guys off the top of my head. And what happened was last week, an offensive lineman from Oregon State tweeted this. He said, "I have just been made aware that the NCAA ruling allowing junior college athletes an extra year of eligibility to participate in the 2025 season will not apply to athletes who were given an additional year of eligibility due to COVID this past season." So anybody that had a COVID year this past season, which Etienne, Lassiter, and Bamba, and maybe more, fit that category. According to this person, now the NCAA hasn't released anything official, but according to this athlete from Oregon State, they would not be eligible. And the reason I say I think that's relevant to ETN is because I think he was probably told the same thing. I think there's a reason why he declared for the NFL draft last week. And I think the timing of that is not coincidence. And so if that is the case, and if the NCAA does not change their mind on that, I think that could prove detrimental to a lot of teams, granted, right? But I think for Lassiter and Bamba, I think that could be, pretty bad for them.
That's a big deal. It's a really big deal. I have to separate my feelings about this because there's my feelings of what it means for BYU, and it's like that sucks because I would have loved to have all three of those guys back.
Yes,
but if I hate this new eligibility world so much, Jake. Where it doesn't mean anything. Guys have been playing around forever now. I mean, Cam Rising can come back again. I think it's insane what we have done. If this Oregon State player Gonzalez, I can't remember his first name, but I think he was an offensive lineman.
Flavio,
how could I forget Flavio?
It seems like he'd be like a model for a cologne or something.
Yeah, something like that.
Flavio Gonzalez.
If he wants to get the ruling changed, all he's got to do is sue the NCAA. They are batting exactly 0 in court. They never win. I don't think that I actually agree. I mean, I really do. I agree with what the NCAA is saying. Is look, we're already doing this funky waiver thing for JUCO people. I think that that's flawed logic. I hate the idea that, I didn't have NIL value in junior college ball, and now I do, and so I shouldn't be punished for playing JUCO. Well, no, because you didn't have any NIL value. And anyway, I have lots of opinions on that altogether, but it does hurt BYU. And so from a purely BYU, very narrow scope, I would love to have Darius Lassiter back. I think BYU's insulated at the wide receiver spot, that they'll be okay without him. Mory Bamba is the most interesting one to me because he's a starter. He's a starter on day one if he's back. If not, you're looking at either a redshirt freshman, maybe a true sophomore who didn't see a ton of playing time, or hopefully a portal guy, but I don't think you're going to get an experienced portal guy. Weber State's out of corners that have played for Jay Hill, so I don't know that
pipeline's out.
Yeah, I don't know that you're going to get that plug and play that you've had the last couple of years. That becomes a really big question mark going forward.
Yeah. So another question mark going forward, and we're going to talk about this in our next segment, and it's not really a question mark of who's starting, because I think we already know who's starting at quarterback for BYU next year. Unless BYU brings in this insane transfer guy, but the quarterback position I think is somewhat of a question mark because you lose a guy like Gary Bohannon, and so Jake I think is your starter, but who backs him up and what's kind of the quarterback situation? What does it look like? We're going to talk about all that a little bit more coming up on the Loyal Cougars podcast. Looking to get your brand in front of BYU's most engaged fans, the Loyal Cougars podcast and Cougar Board are your perfect match. Cougar Board is the largest online community of BYU fans with thousands of posts every day. The Loyal Cougars podcast is the official podcast of Cougar Board, and we have sponsorship opportunities for both the podcast and the site. Contact us at sponsorships@loyalcougars.com, and we'll help your message hit home with the Cougar faithful. Again, that's sponsorships@loyalcougars.com. All right, a topic that I think BYU fans are going to be talking about for most of the offseason is who plays quarterback for BYU. And I think it's an interesting topic because, to be honest, I think Jake Retzloff is the guy. I do think he needs to improve quite a bit, specifically taking care of the ball, and he needs to improve his accuracy. But that all said, I think Jake Retzloff is the guy at quarterback for next year, barring a miraculous incoming transfer. That said, Jeff, you cover these guys. You kind of know. Now, I know some of these guys that played high school football in Utah, but you covered a lot of these guys, or you know a lot of these kind of quarterbacks that are backing up Jake. Who is the most likely to be the backup quarterback next year of the guys that we know that are coming in?
It's McKay Hillstead, and I feel more confident than most people do in McKay Hillstead. So Skyridge High School, go back in time a few years ago.
Yeah. Yep.
He's a dog, man. I mean, he's one of the most impressive high school quarterbacks that I have seen come out of the state of Utah in a long time. And there's been some studs that have come out of the state of Utah over the last several years. And I put McKay right there. The only question mark, and there were two, I guess, and you really kind of can lump them in one together. The only question mark he had coming out of high school was his size and his injury history. And I think they're directly correlated, right? Like his size leads to injuries. That's just the nature of where we're at. But his arm strength, his athleticism, his leadership, and that's stuff that, like, when we talk about Jake Retzlaff, the leadership, the locker room, the command, the poise, all that stuff we don't see in box scores, but it's crucial. And Kalani has made it very clear that that's critical for anybody on his team, but especially quarterback. McKay checks all of those boxes. McKay Hillstead is a dog. He went to Utah State, and his stats, if you just look at what he did at Utah State, I think he played, I can't remember off the top of my head, 8 or 9 games. His stats aren't going to blow anybody's skirt up, but what he proved is he can play with dudes that are college size. And I get it, right? Like Mountain West, Utah State's different than the Big 12, but in terms of just big dudes standing in front of you and big dudes chasing after you, it's the same size, right? Like Utah State's not that much smaller than Oklahoma State is going to be. McKay proved he could play with size. The mistakes that he made, that's freshman stuff. I think McKay Hillstead is the real deal. I thought that McKay could compete for the starting job as early as last year. It was all a matter of like how quickly he learned that playbook, and it is a complex playbook. I think now with a full year of practices and running scout, I love McKay Hillstead. I think he's a dog. Beyond that, I got some question marks.
Yeah, and I think that's where the biggest question mark is like Gary. I think BYU fans were spoiled, by the way, with Gary, because not a lot of teams have a senior backup quarterback that is willing to sit on the bench and really, for all intents and purposes, play kind of this mentor role. You know, like I think senior quarterbacks who think they have a shot in the NFL, and maybe Gary just didn't, but they're all transferring, right? Especially with transfer rules now. Like they are transferring to a team where they can start right away. It's essentially guaranteed for them to where they can get a shot. Yeah. And we'll talk about Gary in just a second, but I agree about McKay. I covered McKay in high school. I think they won a state championship with Skyridge, if I'm not mistaken. In fact, I'm pretty sure they went undefeated. Like they dominated in a region that I believe had Corner Canyon. They've switched around so much, but I believe Corner Canyon was in that same division. If not, I believe they played Corner Canyon in the playoffs.
Yeah, they beat them at right tackles. Yep.
Yes, and we know how good Corner Canyon is. Obviously, they're powerhouse in Utah. And then I remember McKay going to Utah State. He actually beat out, I think, Cooper Laga. Yeah. And Cooper, we all know. We maybe not all know, but do you remember where Cooper played in high school?
He was an Orem guy in high school. And
who he played with?
Yeah, he played with some studs. You almost forgot that Cooper Laga was also really good with Puka and Kingsley. And J-Rob was there that year. Noah Sewell was there.
Was Kingsley there? Was Kingsley there at that time?
Kingsley was young. He was just a sophomore, I believe. Yeah. But
that team was stacked. And Cooper, by the way, I think was a 3-sport state champion. Like Cooper was an athlete, right? Like the whole point of this, by the way, I work with Cooper's mom, and so we would always get updates on Cooper at Utah State. And so it was kind of painful to hear that Cooper lost his job and his starting job, and McKay had won it. But it just shows you like the competitiveness of McKay Hillstead. And I agree with you. His only weakness is going to be his size. Mm-hmm. Similar to like a Riley Nelson, right? Competitive guy, scrappy guy, undersized.
Very. And like, I don't know that we can emphasize that enough. I think when I heap praise upon McKay Hillstead, every time I've done it over the last however long I've praised McKay Hillstead, I met with but Jeff, he's not an NFL guy. And it's like, I have to make sure that everybody knows he is small. He's very small. I think it was Tommy Prassis, his day in a life that he did. He caught up with McKay Hillstead, and they actually call him like a Smurf or something. Like he's small. We got to be honest about it. He's small, but he's a dog. I mean, everything else, every other box, he checks it.
So going back to Gary Bohannon, because this was kind of an interesting point brought up on Cougar Board, either this week or I think it was this last week. MJ Mill said, one lament I have about the 2024 season is after the Colorado game, I found myself wishing we had used Bohannon in Wildcat packages all season. He looked great running the ball in the Alamo Bowl. He says, we had a 6'3", 225 quarterback with elite running talent, and we didn't use him all year until the bowl game. He could have been effective in short yardage and red zone wildcat packages all season, and A-Rod could have evolved those packages throughout the year and thrown in trick play wrinkles to keep defenses on their toes due to Gbo's ability to throw. What wasted talent and opportunity. And first of all, I think Gary was hurt for most of the year. And he's not going to tell you that. I don't think that's ever going to come out officially from coaches or players. I think he was hurt to the point where he wasn't as effective as fans thought he could have been. And if Jake would have gotten hurt, I don't know who would have started. Maybe Gary limps out there and he's playing, but I don't think Gary was in a position to where he could just get thrown into a play or a package and be effective throughout the whole season. Up until the bowl game. I don't know if you know anything about that, but that's what I've been told is that Gary was hurt.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. He was hurt, and I don't think he could have done it. And look, he's got an injury history as well, right? And when I read this post, I get it. And like I think that when you see what he did in the bowl game, that's a really natural response. I think it worked in the bowl game because it hadn't been on film for 12 games. I don't think that works with Gbo, especially a hurt Gbo. I don't think it works because it's a little bit like Reiner Swanson to me. So take a walk with me for a minute, Jake. Like Reiner Swanson's that guy as a tight end. Like he's special, and everybody saw him play, and it was like, why in the world is Reiner Swanson not on the field more? And then we saw him in the bowl game, and it was like, oh my gosh, where has he been all year long? Well, go back to weeks 1, 2, and 3. Reiner Swanson kind of popped, right? Like he got a couple of plays. And he got the ball, and it was great. Everybody loved it. It didn't take long for defensive coordinators to figure out that if 80's on the field, it's 1, a pass play, and B, it's going to 80. Like that's where it's going. If I knew that sitting on my couch, I could promise you Big 12 defensive coordinators knew that. Like Reiner wasn't physically there enough to be a blocker, to be that guy who can create those mismatches routinely, because as soon as you saw him check in, it was like, okay, we know what package is coming. Mm-hmm. I think Gbo is limited like that because of his health, and I don't think he was a good enough thrower that anybody's going to like seriously take him as a throwing threat. Maybe you pop one trick play, and and that's great when it happens. But he's not Taysom Hill, right? Like Taysom Hill has an arm that can compete in the NFL. He's not a starting quarterback in the NFL, but he can make NFL throws. Gary Bohannon does not. And Gary Bohannon, he got hurt at USF. He got hurt at Baylor. Like he's got that injury history, and he's not built like he can just go in obvious running situations, line up as a wildcat, and take 5 or 6 hits a game. Like that's just not who he is. So I don't know. I would have loved to see more Gary because I think he's a great guy, great teammate. It was fun to watch him in the bowl game. I don't think that works over 13 games. And it's like it happened with Reiner. Once he became, the tight end that could also block. In the bowl game, he was in on run sets. Really, I think he had like 5 run snaps all year long up until that bowl game. Once he was able to be disguised and you don't just know, hey, key on 80, then you can use him to create those mismatches. I think 3 was the same way. Like as soon as he came onto the field, I think everybody would have known what was going on. And I don't think he has the skill set to like make something happen when everybody knows what's going on.
Yeah, and here's what I'll say about his game against Colorado. I believe he had one good run.
It was a great run.
It was awesome. Honestly, like I was so stoked for him. Like it was and I thought he was going to score a touchdown. Like how fitting would that have been?
Incredible.
But I think people are putting so much stock into that one play because I think the next time he came in, he threw the interception. And and honestly,
he had another carry, right? That he got stuffed though. Like I think he got inside the 5 and he didn't score.
Yeah. So again, like they're putting so much stock into this one play.
Yeah.
And granted, it was a great play, but I just don't think, like you said, like that's something that is a one-time thing that if it occurs more than once, even if he's coming into the game, like literally like the next time he came in, like you said, he got stuffed. And then the first time he threw the ball, he threw the interception. Like I don't think Gary, as a trick play, wildcat wrinkle would have been a sustainable option. In fact, I don't think a wildcat quarterback should be quarterback, like a quarterback position, right? You see wildcat packages, and they're bringing in like Utah. Utah brings in Brant Keithy, right? They're tight end.
Yeah.
You see a lot of teams, and by the way, wildcat seems to be kind of going away anyway. But you see a lot of teams bringing in like a wide receiver or, maybe a running back, but you rarely see a backup quarterback come in and run a wildcat package because they are a backup quarterback.
Yeah.
A wildcat quarterback has to be a speedster around the edge. They have to have great field vision, to run it up the middle if they need to. And then they also have to be able to throw the ball, but throwing the ball out of a wildcat package is rare, right? Like it's primarily a run type of package. To be honest, I actually think Parker Kingston could be a great wildcat quarterback.
I think it's different too because of the running backs that BYU has in the room. That Gary Bohannon's going to run, power the same way LJ Martin is going to run power.
Yeah.
And so if why is Taysom Hill so different? Because, he's got Alvin Kamara in the backfield, right? And Taysom can do some crazy things that you have to defend each of those separately and individually. Even when they're on the field at the same time, you have to account for like, holy cow, Alvin Kamara can beat us in 100 different ways. And Taysom can do 5 or 6 different things too. Anytime he touches the ball, you've got to be prepared. But if you line up LJ Martin and Gary Bohannon in the backfield consistently, just bring 8 to the box. You're going to be fine. Doesn't matter which way they run. Whichever one of them gets it and goes off either tackle, you defend it the same way because they're both big, physical, downhill type ball carriers. I don't think it works longer than a couple of plays.
Yeah. So in summary, like again, I think BYU is incredibly fortunate to have Gary stick around, sit on the bench for pretty much the entire season as a senior. I think that's huge for a player. But at the same time, I don't think BYU's offense was built for him to come in and be this kind of wildcat trick play quarterback. And that's fine. I think the way the season went, the fact that Jake didn't get hurt at all, was crazy. And that's honestly probably one of the biggest reasons why BYU won as many games as they did, because they had a healthy quarterback, and that's huge. Okay, Jeff, thank you for joining the show. As always, I love seeing your content on social media. I love reading your blog posts and and listening to your podcast. I think you do a great job for the BYU community in putting out content and keeping things engaging and light. And so I'm happy to have you on, and thank you for joining us.
Hey, anytime, man. Appreciate it. It was fun.
All right. Thanks for listening as well to the podcast. If you like what you hear, please go and subscribe to to whatever podcast channel you prefer. Also, like and follow us on all of our social media channels. That would be greatly appreciated as we keep this thing rolling. That'll do it for us. I'm Jake Edmonds. Jeff Hansen joining us on the Loyal Cougars podcast. We'll see you next week.